Hello everyone, Vapian here again with another Nicquid review. This time with 4 flavors from quicknickjuice.com, or QuickNick from here on out. These were samples that were sent to me specifically for review. I didn't get a pick in the flavors, I just said send me whatever you want to. I received 4. Each of these were received in a 65-35 PG-VG blend. They all seemed a little thick for that particular blend. 18 milligrams nicotine for all of these, and I don't recall specifically asking for that. It is kind of my favored nicotine level. Something else I will touch on, because every other review that I have seen or read mentioned this. I would be remiss, I guess, if I didn't. The packaging in these was really impressive. When I first got them, it was a padded envelope, so I opened that up. There's another padded envelope inside of that. Inside of that was a bubble wrapped package, and inside of that were 4 individually bagged bottles, and inside the bag it was bubble wrapped, and when I pulled it out, each of the bottles was individually sealed. And I mean, basically just looked great. If you've watched any video reviews, you've seen this because everyone has mentioned it. Really nice clear bottles, really nice silver labels on them with the name and nicotine levels, nice logo, nicotine warning on the side. So very good presentation overall. So let's see if what's in the bottle demonstrates the same level of attention to detail as the outside of the bottle. Vapor and throat hit. I always talk about those first because usually they're pretty consistent across the board. I will say that all of these, except for one, had a slightly stronger throat hit than I would expect for an 18 milligram level. One of them was about on par for what I'd expect. The other 3 were a little bit stronger. Not unpleasantly so, just noticeably so. And as far as vapor production goes, good across the board at 65-35. You'd expect that. Just to show you. So, excellent vapor production. Couldn't be any happier with that. So, across the board, you'll get good vapor, you'll get good throat hit, you might get a little more throat hit than what you're expecting. So let's get on to the flavors. First one I will talk about is RY4 Tobacco. Now, the hallmarks of an RY4, most people will agree, are the tobacco component, a caramel component, and maybe some vanilla. If you've watched my previous videos, you know I've only really talked about one RY4 type flavor, mostly because it was the first one I tried that really made an impression on me. Where the RY4 really kind of disappointed me in the sample I received is I had very difficult time picking up any tobacco flavor out of this at all. Basically, I got no tobacco flavor out of it most of the time. I did speak with Rich at QuickNick about this because my impression was definitely a lot different than most people seem to be. We really couldn't explain this. It's possible I might re-review this with another sample later down the line, but the sample I received with a fresh IKV 510 atomizer, I could play around with the voltages and get a little bit of tobacco flavor, recognizable tobacco flavor. Mostly what I got was some other flavor that was kind of throwing off the caramel. So as far as the caramel flavor goes, in an atomizer it was kind of a brighter caramel, very sweet, almost too sweet at times. In an a cartomizer, it toned down quite a bit. It was a darker caramel, almost like a caramelized caramel, which I'm not even sure if that's possible, but that's the impression that I got. And the tobacco was, again, nowhere really to be found other than this slightly off taste in the caramel itself. So, to summarize it, sample I received, RY4 Tobacco, I would just scratch the tobacco off the label on this one and call it a caramel. And not necessarily a great caramel. This sample of RY4 Tobacco just simply did not impress me, and at this point I'd be hard-pressed to recommend it. The next flavor I'll talk about is 555 Tobacco. Now again, there are certain characteristics people look for in a 555 that tends to be the tobacco component and a nutty component. Some people lean more towards peanuts than anything else, but just a nutty component is a good broad area to shoot for. As far as the tobacco goes, 555 Tobacco did a pretty good job. I preferred it in atomizers. In an atomizer, the tobacco flavor, I could find the sweet spot and it would just sort of pop out there really well. Kind of strong, fresh, organic, earthy, reminded me a lot of the smell of a fresh tobacco cigarette. So taking a whiff of that, that's almost exactly what this reminded me of. And that came out fairly well in cartomizers. It was a little bit weaker, but not much. Not so much that I didn't enjoy it. So tobacco, the 555 Tobacco satisfied. As far as the nutty component, it was there. Not very distinct. Not a lot of character to it. It was really kind of hard for me to say, oh, that's peanuts or cashews or anything else. It was just nutty. So it's there, but it didn't really grab me in any particular way. What was interesting about this 555 to me that I wasn't really expecting was this occasional floral note that would come through in the flavor. Reminded me a lot of an Oriental tobacco when it came out. Now, interestingly, in atomizers, I did not get that floral component very often. It would peek through from time to time, but not all the time. In cartomizers, it was there most of the time. Every now and again, the tobacco would sort of take over, and I didn't notice it so much, but this almost reminded me of like an Oriental 555, if there is such a thing, because that floral component reminded me a lot of some Oriental tobacco flavors I've tried in the past. So as far as the 555 tobacco goes, I can recommend giving this one a try if you're a 555 fan or even just a tobacco fan. I'm not sure that the nutty flavor in there is going to knock your socks off. That floral component may throw you off a little bit. Personally, I found it was pleasant, and the 555 was a darn good vape. Now we move into sweet territory with a flavor called Enigma. Yes, Enigma. That by itself is a cool name. I get it. I dig cool names. But it doesn't really tell me anything about what this is going to taste like. Unfortunately, going to the website doesn't really give you any idea either. So it's one of the first flavors I've had where I felt really blind going into it. Now I will say that the character on this one changed quite a bit. I ended up vaping most of these over the course of several weeks while some other things were going on, so it's taken me a while to get to this review. Now my notes when I first vaped Enigma, almost as soon as I got it, was that it had a very strong alcohol flavor to it. I couldn't really pin it down to a particular type of alcohol, but there was also a butter rum flavor in there. It reminded me of a butter rum Lifesaver dissolved in vodka. That was the thought that came to my mind. Interestingly, there was flavor on the inhale, flavor on the exhale, and then nothing. It just went away almost immediately. Now, that was within the first couple of days of having it. I set this aside, did some other things for a while, ended up getting back to it about 2 weeks later. The flavor had definitely changed up since then. There's still what I sense as a alcohol component to it. There's still that butter rum component to it, but something else jumped out at me, and it was actually, once I kind of picked up on it, a relatively strong vanilla flavor mixed in with something kind of like a cake. And the reason I say that is, it doesn't jump out at me and say, yellow cake, white cake, angel food cake, or anything like that. It's a cakey flavor mixed in with that vanilla, mixed in with the butter rum, which became fuller and tastes more like an icing now. Definitely butter rum, but like butter rum frosting. So the flavor, rather than just going away now, actually lingers for a bit afterwards. And that's kind of pleasant. Now, the alcohol note, I'll talk about that. Personally, I like that. I'm not sure everyone would, if that sharpness is actually indeed characteristic of this flavor. And when I say sharp, it's just alcohol sharp. So Personally, I enjoyed this one. I actually ended up vaping it all day once, not really thinking about it. I just kept topping off the cartomizer and did that at the beginning of the day, and turned out I just kept vaping it all the way through to the end. So it's a good adult dessert kind of vape. It's sweet, but not too sweet. That alcohol component adds a little bit of an edge to it. So the Enigma I really liked. Now, would it be an all-day vape for me? Well, as it turns out, it can be. Would it be an all-the-time vape? Not necessarily. The adult dessert category is one that I will definitely venture into from time to time, but I tend to favor tobacco flavors more right now, just for my personal vaping. However, I will have to say that this really satisfies the complex vape that I've come to favor as well. It doesn't have the tobacco component. I might try mixing this with the tobacco because it's that interesting. I want to try and explore some things with it. But this has layers to it, and because of the mystery, where personally, Rich, I think you're just messing with us on the name. Thank you very much. But there's layers to it. There's definitely stuff to explore, and the Enigma definitely stands on its own as a sweet adult dessert kind of vape. If you're looking for that kind of flavor that I just described, Enigma should definitely be on your short list. And finally, again in the sweet category, a flavor that actually just sort of walks up and slaps you in the face with what it's supposed to be. This one is called French Toast. Well, good. That gives me something to shoot for. The French Toast I found, I liked it a lot in atomizers. I tend to favor it in atomizers, and here's why. In an atomizer, almost anywhere I vaped it, the French Toast reminded me very much of French toast. It had almost all of the components I was looking for. I can taste the bread, I can taste butter, lots of butter. The maple syrup stands on its own. There's a hint of cinnamon in there. It all blends very well and all the flavors mix well. There's so much of a butter flavor to it that it's almost a sweet and savory vape, which is kind of unique. I'm not sure that I've had anything which really kind of hits both of those targets at the same time. The only thing that this lacked when I vaped it in atomizers was the eggy flavor that you get from real French toast, because it is, you know, bread soaked in egg and vanilla, right? That eggy component wasn't there, so that was the only thing it was missing. As it stands, in atomizers, French toast was just a great, sweet, savory vape. Definitely reminded me of French toast. Cartomizers, for me, was a different situation, long term. Now, initially, when I first filled cartomizers with this seemed to take a little bit longer than any of the others to actually soak into the cartomizer. And once it was in there, it performed really well until I topped off the cartomizer 2 or 3 times, or in the tank. Once I'd gotten about a third of the way, maybe halfway through the tank, the flavors started to get off a bit. And it varied between the types of cartomizers I was using. For example, if I was using an 808 cartomizer, when the flavor started to get off, it took on a very strong toast-oriented flavor. It reminded me very much of very dark toast with lots and lots of butter. The maple syrup and the cinnamon flavors dropped out, became muted, and that toast and butter flavor really took over. In a 510, the Bogue 3 ohm 510 cartomizer that I tend to favor, what happened was all of the flavors simply got darker and more muddled. Strong, I wouldn't say that they were muted. It's just that all of them sort of lost character and took on a almost like a burned taste, but not quite burned. Interestingly, if I took the cartomizers, blew them out, I got some very dark fluid that would come out of the bottom of them when I did that. Once I blew them out, reprimed them, they tasted good again for a little while, until I had topped them off a couple of times, gotten a little bit further through the tank, and then this would happen again, but on a shorter cycle. Really, I could only get 3/4 of a day, maybe a day of vaping out of a cartomizer, and I had to work more at it than I would with any of these other flavors that I talked about. So the French toast ultimately was not a long-term satisfying vape in cartomizers. So let's wrap this up with a nice little bow, shall we? RY4 Tobacco I found to be disappointing. The sample I received simply did not have a strong tobacco component to it. If it does have a tobacco in there, it's throwing off the taste of the caramel. The caramel itself was not real satisfying to me. It was smooth enough, but again, regardless of whether I was using an atomizer or a cartomizer, it just tasted off from what I would expect for a caramel. So the RY4 Tobacco was disappointing to me. At this time, I really can't recommend it. The 555 Tobacco, really satisfied in the tobacco department, especially in an atomizer. Performed well in cartomizers and tanks also, but the tobacco flavor really shined in an atomizer. The nutty component was kind of indistinct, and that in itself didn't really grab me or impress me one way or the other. There was a floral component that came out from time to time in atomizers, and was there most of the time in cartomizers. Now, personally, I did not find that unpleasant. I just found it surprising for a 555 tobacco flavor. So I would recommend it, but don't be surprised if there's a bit of a twist to it, sort of an oriental tobacco twist compared to just a straight 555. The Enigma. It's good. Going in blind, I had no idea what to expect, but it took time to steep, which I hate it when I have to steep anything, but once that had occurred, it took on a lot of different components. I definitely sense an alcohol kind of taste to it. Butter rum, which early on was the predominant flavor, although it wasn't a lingering flavor. It just sort of came and went. After the steeping period, it took on sort of a like a butter rum frosting kind of flavor, which filled the mouth a little bit better. After steeping, the vanilla that's in here really came out, and something very much like a cake. I'm not really sure what kind of cake, but overall impression is an adult dessert vape with that vanilla cake, butter rum frosting, and alcohol mix. It's a very interesting vape, could easily be an all-day vape, provided that that alcohol component doesn't throw you off. And finally, the French toast. In an atomizer, great French toast flavor. It had the bread, maple syrup, cinnamon, the butter in particular. Very sweet and savory kind of vape. The only thing kind of missing to it to me was an eggy component that I would expect from a real French toast. This is the only one of these that I really can't recommend for long-term use in cartomizers. So that's it for my review. I hope you found it helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again here on YouTube later. Take care.